Shelby is a Daily Caller journalist who has been reporting on the ground on the front lines of these riots. Shelby, it's great to see you again. You were there at the riots this weekend. Tell us what you saw.
Yeah, Liz, so there's been a ton of unrest. We typically see huge crowds earlier in the night, starting around, 9, and it's fairly peaceful at that time. But as the night goes on, 10:30, 11 o'clock, there's a huge group of protesters or rioters who turn their focus onto the federal courthouse. And they've been told, there's warnings given by federal officers, don't touch the fence, don't try to break through, and time again, night after night, they're trying to breach the fence, and it starts sort of this war every night on the streets of downtown Portland.
Were the riots going down? Were they de-escalating until the administration sent in federal forces? The Democrats like Joe Biden saying they are a peaceful protest. Jerry Nadler saying Antifa violence in Portland is a quote myth. What are your thoughts on both of those issues?
We weren't here before federal officers were deployed, but certainly from people we've spoken to, these protests have been ongoing and really haven't showed a major sign of slowing down. By the time we got here, the courthouse was it's littered in graffiti. There's things on the street from fires being set and fireworks going off. And I saw that clip the other day of Jerry Nadler saying that, Antifa is a myth and the violence here in Portland is just a DC lie, essentially. And the videos we've taken all week kind of speak for themselves, and it's very clearly not the case, I think.
What do the rioters want? Do they want, defund the police? Do they want income inequality solved? I think you heard them chanting a certain chant. Can you tell us what they want and what will make them stop?
So we did hear them. One of the chants that I think stood out to me the most was they were saying they're not going to stop until all the precincts are burned to the ground. So this is an extreme attitude, and they want the federal officers out. But who knows, if the federal officers leave, will they leave the courthouse alone? I'm not sure. So they're angry at the federal officers. They're angry at the police officers. I think that they just want all of this defunded. They want the officers out of Portland. And night after night, we're seeing there's no slowing down.
Yeah, no slowing down. Polls by outfits like Pew Research show many Americans welcome racial and ethnic diversity and believe their community should be diverse. People support peaceful protests as it is stipulated under our founding documents for our country. We are, Shelby, in an unprecedented historic moment, a pandemic triggering significant joblessness, a fight over police brutality. But from where you sit, it seems like it's now morphed away from that and changed into something else. Rioters now shooting people shot in Austin, Texas, and Aurora, Colorado. And talk to us about Portland police finding a bag of rifle ammunition and Molotov cocktails after responding to a chaos in a park in Portland near the protests. Can you talk to us about that?
Yeah, so we don't have much more information besides their statement. They found numerous bullets and Molotov cocktails in a bag right near the courthouse. There's been a stabbing of a Trump supporter the other night. There were shots fired in another incident. So it's clearly escalating, and I think your earlier point about the unrest sort of branching off from the original reason that these protests started is really accurate. We've seen it time and time again, in Seattle, in Washington, D.C., in New York City. There's definitely different groups that are now taking advantage of why these protests first started.
Do you see police showing restraint? Do you see them showing restraint, taking a hands-off approach, but then they have to respond when attacked? Because in Seattle, they torched construction buildings at the site of a new youth detention center. Rioters vandalized, cop vehicles in New York and in Philly. In Los Angeles, protesters attacked police officers. Do you see officers showing restraint?
Yes, so every night we've been on the ground, officers have issued multiple warnings before coming out and deploying crowd control munitions. So we'll hear over the loudspeaker, the first warning is typically don't touch the fence, don't try to breach the perimeter. The second warning, when these rioters ignore the first warning, is typically this has been declared an unlawful assembly, leave the area immediately. Nobody typically listens, and then, you know, the officers are forced to come out. And during this time when these warnings are being issued, it's a result of fireworks being thrown at the courthouse, fires being set inside the fence. They throw bags of garbage over the fence and then light it on fire. All sorts of things are being tossed, and then they continue to be tossed when officers come out to disperse the crowd.
Yeah. And now we've got police officers releasing their body cam footage. We just showed it in Seattle to show you what they're dealing with. You know, Shelby, Seattle now in the process of cutting its police budget in half, and the chief of police there, Carmen Best, now effectively warning local Seattle businesses, you're on your own, because the city council has hamstrung us in how we can respond to these rioting. And you know, we've been reporting, Shelby, we told the viewers about rioters across the country now exposing police officers and their families' home addresses and phone numbers on the internet. The rioters showed up at the home of acting Homeland Security Secretary Chad Wolf. Are you hearing about that as well, that this is now, as you point out, morphed into something else, that now they're showing up at their personal homes to basically protest? What's your reaction?
I've heard reports of that, and you know, numerous officers have been doxxed and had their their information made public. I think it's dangerous. You know, these officers, from what I've seen on the ground in Portland, are just trying to do their job. We actually saw when it was declared a riot Saturday night, while there were multiple people detained, they also let multiple people go. They picked them up. We have a video of one officer literally picking up a mom off, you know, off the ground and just telling her to leave the area. So they're, I don't think that they want to have this battle every night.
Yeah. Good to see you, Shelby Talcott. Great journalism there. Come back soon, okay? And stay safe.
Mayor of Portland, Oregon, has compared the scene in his city overnight to urban warfare. Mayor Ted Wheeler was among those who was tear-gassed, there he is there, during a protest against racial injustice and inequality. Clashes between protesters and federal agents the president has deployed there have repeatedly become violent.
And earlier in the evening, the mayor spoke to demonstrators about the presence of those federal officers sent to the city by the Trump administration. Let's go to our security correspondent, Josh Campbell. And Josh, you've been on the ground now for days and nights, I should say, reporting on this. You were also tear gassed, so you know the pain that it inflicts. Can you tell us what is playing out on the streets now for, you know, more than 55 straight nights?
Yeah, good morning, Jim and Poppy. Another night of protests here in the city of Portland, Oregon. I apologize for my voice. We've been tear gassed, I think, more times than I can count overnight. We saw protesters coming out, most of them overwhelmingly peaceful. But as the sun went down, we did see some acts of destruction. There was a small group of rioters among this crowd that were setting fires outside the building, that were launching fireworks at the building, that causing federal agents to come out to launch tear gas. The mayor, as you mentioned, was there. He was part of those who were tear gassed as well. And I actually caught up with him and I asked him about this whole idea that it's federal officials to blame. He's been saying that constantly, that he wants to see these federal officers out of his city. I asked him, you know, does the Portland police have any responsibility here? Listen here to what he said about federal officials.
This is clearly a waste of federal resources, and it's getting increasingly dangerous. We did not ask the feds to be here. We don't want them here. They're not helping the situation. They're not appropriately trained, and we're demanding that they leave. And their presence here is creating more problems rather than less problems. The tactics they've been using are abhorrent.
And that's the standoff that continues. Again, federal officials say they're not going unless that building is free from any threats. The mayor and protesters say that they're not leaving as well. Jim and Poppy.
You know, Josh, you of course spent a number of years in law enforcement, and to the mayor's point there, you know, part of the training is de-escalation, right? The president's both to maintain the peace, but not raise, but lower the temperature. And I just wonder, based on what you've witnessed there, and even some of these confrontations with the mothers who've come out, right, to sort of surround and protect the protesters, are those federal agents helping or hurting the problem from what you've seen?
Yeah, you know, federal officials tell us that they're there to protect federal property. And although these protests are overwhelmingly peaceful, you do have a small subset that come out at night that set fires, again, that launch fireworks. We have seen in the past federal officials be heavily criticized for their actions both on the ground at the federal building and also in and around the community. Now, officials there outside the building have come in conflict with, as you mentioned, protests like the Wall of Moms, launching tear gas, trying to move them back. We also know that CBP, Customs and Border Protection, they were heavily criticized for their actions in going out and arresting people. That continues to be a theme from these protesters. They want that to stop. I will finally mention one thing, that last night we saw a different shift from these federal agents. While in previous nights they have gone out and actually set up a line and actually pushed protesters back, last night, they didn't leave the building. They came out, they would push protesters back, they would tear gas us, but they weren't pushing them blocks and blocks away. Whether that's a pattern we'll continue to see, we'll have to wait. But again, that's part of that criticism that we've seen from federal officials, over excessive use of force. Perhaps last night, we've seen a new shift from them in just relegating their activity to that building. Jim and Poppy.
Well, the similarity in tactics we saw at Lafayette Square, right outside the White House, which of course met with all that criticism, is notable. Josh Campbell, thanks very much.